Colonel Jonathan Mercer looked the woman up and down, then laughed out loud in front of 40 of America's deadliest operators. Sweetheart, the grocery store is 40 miles back the way you came. This is a professional range. Civilians wait in the car or civilians leave. He said it loud enough that the men behind him shifted their boots in the dirt. He wanted them to hear. He wanted her to shrink. And the worst part was that he had no idea who he was talking to or what she was about to do to every assumption he had ever made about strength. Before we go any further, if you believe respect should be earned by what a person can do and not by how they look, take 1 second right now and subscribe to this channel. Stay with me all the way to the end of this story because the ending will stay with you long after it's over. And do me one small favor. Drop the name of the city where you're watching from in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. The heat came off the Black Ridge Tactical Range in slow waves, the kind of Arizona morning that made even seasoned men squint and sweat before the first round was ever chambered. 40 operators stood in loose formation near the firing line, the best long-range shooters that America's elite units could produce, and every one of them had traveled a long way to be tested. They had been told this evaluation would be unlike anything they had faced. They had been told a legendary instructor was coming, someone whose reputation was spoken about in low voices and half sentences. What they had not been told was who that instructor would be. And so when the plain gray SUV rolled onto the range and parked at an angle near the equipment tents, most of them barely glanced at it. Vehicles came and went all morning. This one meant nothing to them. Then the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was somewhere in her late 30s, maybe a little older, with the kind of stillness in her that most people never learn no matter how long they live. She wore faded tactical pants, a plain shirt, and boots that had clearly walked a great deal of hard ground. She carried a worn black rifle case in one hand, the corners scuffed pale from years of being set down on rock and metal and truck beds. She had no visible rank, no patches, no medals, nothing that announced her. She shut the door, adjusted the case in her grip, and began walking toward the firing line with a calm, unhurried stride like a person arriving somewhere she had every right to be. Colonel Jonathan Mercer saw her coming, and something in his chest tightened with a feeling he would have called instinct, but was really just habit dressed up as wisdom. 42 years he had given to the service. 4 decades of watching men break and watching men rise, of standing on ranges exactly like this one, and deciding sometimes in a single glance who belonged and who was wasting everyone's time. He was proud of that instinct. He believed it had never failed him. He believed toughness was forged in pressure and that the only people worth a damn were the ones who survived the fire. And he believed deep in the oldest part of himself that he could read a person's worth in the way they walked toward him. He watched the woman walk, and his instinct told him she did not belong. "Hold up," he called out loud, stepping forward so that his shadow fell across her path. "Hold up right there." She stopped. She looked at him with a patience that, had he been a wiser man, might have warned him. But Mercer was not feeling wise that morning. He was feeling like the man in charge, and he had an audience. "Can I help you, Colonel?" she said. "You can start by telling me what you think you're doing walking onto my firing line," Mercer said. "This is a closed evaluation, active operators only. You're not on my roster, you're not in a uniform, and you're carrying a rifle case like you're planning to set up a lemonade stand. So let's save us both some time. Who are you and who let you in the gate?" A few of the younger operators glanced at each other. One of them, a lean sniper named Daniel Brooks, who had been quietly reserving judgment all morning, felt something uncomfortable turn over in his stomach. There was a tone in the colonel's voice that he had heard before from men like Mercer, a tone that had already decided the answer before the question was finished. The woman did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, "I was assigned to this evaluation. My orders came through the same channel yours did." "Assigned?" Mercer repeated, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he has already made up his mind to be cruel. "You hear that, gentlemen? She was assigned." He turned back to her. "Ma'am, I have been running long-range evaluations since before half these boys were born. I know every instructor cleared to work a course like this one. I know their names, their records, their kill lists, and I have never once heard of you. So either somebody upstairs made a clerical error, or somebody thought it would be funny to send a civilian out to the desert to watch the real professionals work." "I'm not a civilian," the woman said. "Just that. No heat behind it. A simple correction, the way you might correct someone about the day of the week. But Mercer had already stopped listening. That was the thing about him, the flaw that 4 decades of success had buried so deep he no longer knew it was there. He did not listen once he had decided. He heard only the story he was already telling himself. You know what? He said, I don't have the time for this. We've got a 2,000-meter problem to solve today, and I need my men focused, not distracted by a guest who wandered in off the highway. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your case, you're going to walk back to that nice SUV of yours, and you're going to wait out there in the shade until somebody comes to sort out whatever paperwork mix-up sent you here. Are we clear? There was a silence then, a real one. The kind that settles over a group of men who are watching something happen and are not sure whether to speak. Daniel Brooks opened his mouth. He did not know exactly what he was going to say. Sir, maybe we should check the roster first. But before the words came, the woman spoke, and what she said was so quiet and so complete that it silenced whatever he had been about to offer. All right, she said. That was all. All right, she turned without argument, without offense, without the wounded look Mercer had been half hoping to see, and she walked back toward her vehicle with the same unhurried calm she had walked in with. She set her rifle case down in the shade beside the SUV, leaned her back against the door, folded her arms, and settled in to watch. Mercer felt a small, ugly glow of satisfaction. Problem solved. He turned back to his men and clapped his hands together once loud. All right, gentlemen, he barked. Enough distractions. Let's find out who among you actually earned the right to be here. First shooter on the line. We've got a target waiting and what doesn't care about your feelings. What Colonel Jonathan Mercer did not know, what he could not have known, because he had refused to hear the one thing that would have told him, was that the woman now leaning quietly against a dusty SUV was the very person the entire range had gathered to meet. Her name was Captain Olivia Carter. In certain rooms, in certain briefings that most of the men on that range would never be cleared to attend, she was known by another name. A call sign spoken with a kind of reverence usually reserved for legends who were already dead. Ghost 7. She was, by the accounting of people whose job it was to know such things, one of the finest long-range shooters the country had ever produced. There were shots credited to her that were still classified distances that instructors quoted to their students as the theoretical limit of what a human being could do, in a service record that read less like a career and more like a series of impossibilities that someone had somehow made real. And she had just been told to go wait in the car. She did not mind. That was the strange thing. The thing that Mercer would never in 1,000 years have understood about her. She did not mind at all. She had learned a long time ago, and at a great cost, that the moment you needed people to know who you were, you had already lost something more important than their respect. She had learned to let the work speak. She had learned that patience was its own kind of weapon, and that the men who mocked you before they understood you were often the ones who needed the lesson most. So she waited. She watched. And while 40 of the finest shooters in America stepped up one at a time to be humiliated by a target none of them understood, Captain Olivia Carter stood in the shade and began quietly to read the wind. The first shooter walked to the line with the swagger of a man who had never seriously failed at anything. His name was Reyes, and he had a chest full of deployments and a reputation for making hard shots look routine. He settled behind his rifle, and the whole range went quiet to watch. 2,000 meters away, across a wide, ugly canyon that dropped and rose and twisted the air into shapes no eye could see, a steel target sat baking in the sun. It was on paper an impossible distance for anything but the most perfect combination of skill and conditions. Mercer had chosen it precisely because it was cruel. Reyes breathed. He settled. He fired. The spotter beside him watched through the scope and said nothing for a long moment, then flatly miss, low and right. A ripple went through the men. Reyes did not panic. He adjusted, muttered something about the drop, breathed again, and fired a second time. Miss, the spotter said. Still right, you're chasing it. Reyes lifted his head off the rifle, and for the first time that morning, his confidence showed a hairline crack. That's not possible, he said. My dope is dialed. That's a good solution. Your solution's fine, Mercer said, walking in the line with his hands behind his back. Your discipline isn't. You're flinching. Next. But it was not Reyes flinching, and some of the men were already beginning to suspect it. The second shooter fared no better, nor the third. One by one, America's most experienced marksmen stepped up to the line, and one by one the canyons swallowed their shots and gave nothing back. Some missed left, some missed right, some sent rounds sailing so far off that the spotters could not even call where they had gone. These were not weak men, these were not amateurs. Every one of them had made shots in combat that would have made a civilian's blood run cold. And yet the target sat untouched, gleaming in the heat, mocking every last one of them. Daniel Brooks watched the pattern form and felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Because there was a pattern, he could see it, even if he could not yet name it. The misses were not random. Men who dialed for the same conditions were landing their rounds in wildly different places. It was as if the air between the firing line and that target was not one thing, but many things layered and shifting a puzzle nobody had been handed the pieces to. Mercer, meanwhile, was growing angrier by the hour, and his anger took the shape it always took. It looked for someone to blame. "You know what your problem is?" he snapped at the ninth shooter, a decorated operator who had just sent his third round into the void. "You've gotten soft. All of you. You rely on your computers, your ballistic apps, your fancy gear. You punch numbers into a machine, and you trust the machine, and the second the machine can't save you, you fall apart. In my day, we read the wind with our own two eyes, and we made the shot because we had to. That's the difference between you and a real marksman. You've forgotten what skill looks like." The men said nothing, but their silence had changed. Earlier that morning, it had been the silence of respect. Now it was something colder. The silence of men who were being blamed for a test they had not been given a fair chance to pass by a commander who would not admit that the problem might be the course and not the shooters. And through all of it, off to the side in the shade, a woman stood with her arms folded and her eyes moving in a slow, steady pattern that nobody bothered to notice. Because Olivia Carter was not watching the rifles. She was not watching the shooters. She was not even really watching the target. She was watching the air. She watched the small range flags nearest the line, how they lifted and fell the direction they pointed, and the exact moment they changed their minds. She watched the dust that the shooters kicked up, how it drifted and where it went. She watched the shimmer that rose off the canyon floor at the midpoint, the way the heat bent the light there differently than it did up close. She watched a hawk ride a current halfway across and read from the tilt of its wings a truth about the wind that no instrument on that range could measure. She stood perfectly still, and inside that stillness, her mind was doing something extraordinary, something that looked from the outside like doing nothing at all. She was building a map, not of the ground, but of the invisible ocean of moving air between the line and the target, and the more she watched, the more clearly she saw why every single one of these good men was failing. It was Daniel Brooks who finally broke away from the group. He was not supposed to. Shooters were meant to stay near the line ready for their turn. But Daniel had been watching her for the better part of an hour. This woman, the colonel, had banished, and he had noticed something that stuck in his mind like a splinter. She was not sulking. She was not on her phone. She was not doing any of the things a person waits out an insult by doing. She was working. She was reading something out there that the rest of them could not see. And Daniel Brooks, who was young and hungry and not yet certain enough of himself to be arrogant, wanted to know what it was. He walked over to her, quietly keeping half an eye on the colonel's back. "Ma'am," he said, "I hope I'm not out of line." Olivia's eyes did not leave the canyon. "You're not," she said. Daniel hesitated, then went for it. "You've been watching the range all morning, not the shooters, something else. And I've been trying to figure out what everybody's missing out there, and I can't crack it, and I've got a feeling you already have." He paused. "You know why everyone's missing, don't you?" For the first time since Mercer had ordered her away, a small change moved across Olivia Carter's face. Not a smile exactly. Something closer to recognition. As if of all the men on that range, this one had finally asked the only question that mattered. She turned and looked at him. "There isn't one win," she said. Daniel blinked. "Ma'am, that's the mistake. That's the whole mistake right there." She lifted her chin toward the canyon, and when she spoke again, her voice had the quiet certainty of someone describing a thing they could see as plainly as their own hand. "Every man out here is reading one wind, the surface wind, the one they can feel on their face, the one that pushes those flags by the line. And they're building a good, honest solution around it, and they're missing." She shook her head slowly. "There are three." "Three winds," Daniel repeated. "Three," she said. "There's the surface wind you can feel. That's the easy one, and it's the one that lies to you because It's only telling you about the first 200 meters. Then there's a crosswind down inside that canyon that runs almost perpendicular to the surface because the canyon walls funnel it. You can't feel it. You can't see it unless you know how to look. But every round these men send out their drops down into that canyon on its way across, and that hidden crosswind shoves it sideways, and by the time it climbs back out the other side, it's already yards off course. She let that settle. And then there's the last one, the worst one. The thermal rising straight up off that canyon floor where the sun's been cooking the rock all morning. It's not pushing left or right, it's lifting. It changes the drop, it changes everything, and it changes minute to minute as the ground heats up. Daniel Brooks stood very still. Because it fit, every piece of it fit. The misses that made no sense, the good shooters landing rounds in impossible places, the way two men with identical solutions could send their rounds to two different corners of the sky. It was not the shooters. It had never been the shooters. So they're not doing anything wrong, Daniel said slowly. They're doing everything right, Olivia said, for a problem that isn't the one in front of them. They're solving a range. This isn't a range. She looked back out at the canyon, at the shimmer rising off it, at the target sitting quiet and untouched 2,000 meters away. It's a battlefield, and nobody told them what the battlefield actually is. Something moved through Daniel, then a mix of excitement and a strange sinking discomfort, because he understood now that the man in charge, the man with 4 decades and a chest full of stories, had built a test that his own men could not pass. And instead of asking why, that man had spent the whole morning telling them they were soft, telling them they had forgotten what skill looked like, when the truth standing right here beside a dusty SUV in the shape of a woman he had ordered off the line was that the colonel himself did not understand the very course he had designed. You could make that shot, Daniel said. It was not quite a question. Olivia did not answer that. She just looked at him, and there was something almost gentle in her expression, something that said the answer was not the point. Then she said, "The shot's not what matters, Sergeant. Anybody can be taught to read 3 winds if they'll shut up long enough to see them. What matters is who's willing to admit they don't already know." She nodded once toward the men at the line, toward the colonel pacing behind them. "That's the real test today. Not the target, them." Daniel opened his mouth to ask what she meant, but at that moment Mercer's voice cut across the range like a blade. "Brooks," the colonel barked, "you want to socialize or you want to shoot? Get back on this line." Daniel straightened. He gave Olivia a small nod, a silent thank you, and started back toward the group. But something had shifted in him. He walked back to that line carrying a piece of knowledge that none of the other men had, and for the first time all morning, he was not thinking about the target the way they were. He was thinking about the wind, all 3 of them. He settled behind his rifle. The spotter beside him read off a solution built for the surface wind, the same solution that had failed 9 men before him. And Daniel quietly made a change. He did not fully understand the canyon crosswind, yet could not calculate it the way she could, but he held for it. He gave the round more room than his instincts screamed for held, into a wind he could not feel. Aimed at a piece of empty air, far to the side of where every other man had aimed. He breathed. He fired. The spotter went silent. Then in a voice that had lost its flatness, he said, "That's close. That's real close. Edge of the steel, low left." A murmur went through the men, because Daniel Brooks, the youngest shooter on the line, had just come closer to that impossible target than any operator all morning, and he had done it by aiming somewhere that made no sense to anyone who did not know what he now knew. Mercer frowned. "Lucky adjustment," he said. But there was something underneath the words now, a thread of uncertainty that had not been there before. Daniel did not correct him. He simply lifted his head off the rifle and, without quite meaning to, glanced back toward the SUV in the shade. Olivia Carter met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod. And in that moment, Daniel understood that he had just been given a gift, and that the man in charge of this entire evaluation was the only person on the range too proud to receive it. The morning wore into afternoon, and the target stayed unconquered, and the men grew tired in the way men grow tired when their best is not good enough, and no one will tell them why. Mercer paced. Mercer blamed. Mercer told stories about his own day, about ranges he had mastered and shots he had made. And the more the men failed, the louder those stories became, until it started to sound less like instruction and more like a man shouting to keep from hearing his own doubts. And a few of the men, the sharper ones, began to do the math that their commander refused to do. They watched Daniel Brooks land near the steel by aiming into nothing. They watched the misses cluster in patterns that no wind they could feel would explain. And a quiet, dangerous thought began to move among them, passing glances and small nods rather than words. The thought was this: what if it isn't us? What if the woman he sent away knows something the colonel doesn't? One of them, a grizzled operator named Whitaker, who had more years in than anyone but Mercer himself, finally said it out loud, low to the men around him. 9 of us. 9. And not one of us can touch it. That's not 9 bad shooters. I've shot with these boys. That's a problem with the water, not the fish. He glanced toward the shade, toward the still figure by the SUV, and that woman's been staring at that canyon like she's reading a book none of us can see. Colonel says she's a civilian, someone muttered. Colonel Whitaker said has been wrong before, he just doesn't tend to notice. It was heresy spoken quietly, and it did not travel far. But it traveled, and that was the thing about the truth, the thing Olivia Carter had known her whole life. You could order it off your range. You could send it to wait in the car. But you could not stop it from being true, and you could not stop good men from beginning slowly to see it. Mercer felt the change in his men before he understood it. He felt their attention drifting, felt the respect he took for granted thinning out like the desert air, and it made him angrier, and his anger made him louder, and his loudness made it worse. He was a man standing on a foundation he had never questioned, feeling the first small tremors run through it, and every instinct he had told him to press down harder, to reassert control, to remind everyone who was in charge. You want to know what's wrong with the modern operator? He announced to the group, to all of them, though he was really only talking to the fear in his own chest. You've been coddled. You've been handed everything. You've never had to earn a shot the hard way, so the second a real range humbles you, you start looking around for something to blame. The gear, the course, the wind. He said the word wind with contempt, not knowing, not able to know that it was the exact word that held the answer he was refusing to hear. In my 40 years, I have seen 100 men wash out because they'd rather blame the range than look in the mirror. Don't be those men. Dig deeper, try harder, and stop looking at that parking lot like there's some magic answer sitting out there in a lawn chair. Daniel Brooks felt his jaw tighten because the magic answer was sitting out there. And it was not magic at all. It was 30 years of a woman learning to see what other people walked right past, and this proud old man was too frightened of what it might mean to walk over and ask. But Daniel said nothing. Not yet. It was not his place, and something told him this was not his moment. This was hers. And so he waited the way she had taught him to wait, without ever saying a word about it, and he watched the desert, and he listened to the wind, and he understood for the first time in his career that patience was not the absence of action. It was action. It was the hardest action of all. The afternoon light began to slant. The heat off the canyon floor started to shift as the sun changed its angle, and the thermal that Olivia had described to Daniel began subtly to change its character. And if any of the shooters had known to account for it, they might have noticed. None of them did, except one standing in the shade who noticed everything. And it was in that hour, with the men exhausted and the colonel hoarse, and the target still gleaming and untouched, that the sound of a helicopter came in low over the ridge. Every head turned, rotors beat the hot air. A dark shape crested the rocks and settled toward the far end of the range, kicking up a storm of dust, and the men shielded their eyes and waited to see who would step out. Because there was only one reason a bird like that would come to a place like this in the middle of an evaluation. Somebody important was arriving. Mercer straightened his shoulders and smoothed the front of his shirt, and something like relief crossed his face. This, he thought, would be the mysterious instructor. This would be the legend they had all been waiting for, arriving in style, and the colonel could finally hand off this frustrating day to appear, a real professional. Another man of his caliber who would understand the discipline of the range and put these soft young shooters in their place. The dust settled, the rotors wound down, a door opened, and a senior commander stepped out onto the range, a 2-star general with silver at his temples and a walk that commanded silence without asking for it. He wore the quiet authority of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. The men came to attention. Mercer stepped forward, chest out, ready to receive him, ready to be recognized, ready to be told in front of all these men that he had been running a proper hard evaluation the way a proper hard man should. The general returned Mercer's salute without breaking stride. And then he walked right past him. He walked past the colonel, past the 40 operators standing at attention, past the firing line, and the untouched target, and the whole apparatus of the day that Mercer had built and ruled. He walked with purpose across the length of that range, and every eye on that range followed him, and the confusion on the men's faces slowly turned to something else as they realized where he was headed. He was walking toward the SUV in the shade. He was walking toward the woman. Mercer's arm was still half raised from the salute, and it dropped slowly to his side, and a cold, creeping understanding began to move up from somewhere deep in his gut, the kind of understanding that a proud man's mind fights with everything it has, because to accept it is to feel the ground open beneath 42 years of certainty. The general stopped in front of Olivia Carter. The whole range had gone so quiet that the only sound was the wind, the very wind that had defeated them all, moving softly through the flags. And then the two-star general, a man before whom Colonel Jonathan Mercer would have stood at rigid attention, drew himself up straight, and he saluted her. "Captain Carter," the general said, his voice carrying clear across the silent range. "My apologies for the delay. We were waiting on final confirmation before I could brief you in front of the group. I hope they haven't given you too much trouble out here." Olivia Carter pushed off the side of the SUV, unfolded her arms, and returned the salute with an ease that told everyone watching she had done it 10,000 times. "No trouble at all, sir," she said. And though her face gave nothing away, Daniel Brooks, who was close enough to see, caught the faintest flicker at the corner of her mouth. "I've been getting a good read on the range." 40 operators stood frozen. Not one of them breathed. And in the center of them all, Colonel Jonathan Mercer felt the entire architecture of his morning collapse in on itself, one certainty at a time. The woman he had ordered off the line. The civilian he had told to wait in the car. The guest he had mocked in front of his men. The one he had said didn't belong. The one he had been so sure about so instantly, and totally sure the way he had been sure about 1,000 things across 4 decades of never once being told he was wrong. She was a captain. She was the instructor. She was the reason every last one of them had come to this desert. And the general of the whole operation had just crossed an entire range to salute her while walking past the colonel like he was a fence post. Mercer's mouth had gone dry. He tried to make sense of it, tried to find the version of events in which he had not just humiliated himself in front of 40 of the finest operators in the country, and there was no such version, and some part of him knew it, and that part was screaming. The general turned finally and let his eyes sweep across the assembled men, and then he settled his gaze on Mercer, and there was nothing cruel in it. That was almost the worst part. He was not angry. He was simply quietly disappointed, the way you are disappointed in a man you expected more from. "Gentlemen," the general said, addressing all of them but looking at the colonel, "let me introduce someone properly, since it seems introductions were skipped this morning. This is Captain Olivia Carter. Some of you may know her by a different name. In certain circles, she's called Ghost 7. He let that name land, and Daniel Brooks saw more than one veteran operator go pale because they knew that name. They had heard that name spoken in the way you speak of things that are almost too much to be believed. She is without exaggeration one of the finest long-range shooters this country has ever produced. There are men alive today because of shots she made that the rest of us were told could not be made. When we needed someone to evaluate you to find out which of you is ready for what's coming, there was exactly one name on the list, hers. The silence that followed was total, and Olivia Carter stepped forward out of the shade into the hard afternoon light and picked up her worn black rifle case from where it had waited beside her all morning. She walked toward the firing line, toward the target that had defeated 40 of America's best, toward the colonel who had told her she did not belong. She walked with the same unhurried calm she had walked in with hours ago, and now every eye on that range followed her, and now nobody was laughing. She stopped in front of Colonel Jonathan Mercer. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mercer stood there with the wreckage of his certainty all around him, and he did the only thing a man like him knew how to do when he was cornered, which was to reach for his pride like a drowning man reaches for a rope. "One shooter after another," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to, and not a single hit all day. "Nobody has passed this range. Not one man. And you think you're going to walk out here and do what 40 operators couldn't?" Olivia Carter looked at him. Not with anger, not even with the satisfaction she would have been entitled to. She looked at him the way you look at a man who has spent his whole life mistaking the sound of his own voice for the truth, and when she finally spoke, her words were quiet, and they cut deeper than any shout ever could. "Colonel," she said, "you built a test you didn't understand, and then you spent all day blaming good men for failing it." She knelt, set the case flat on the ground, and unlatched it. The men leaned in despite themselves, half expecting to see some gleaming, exotic weapon worthy of the legend they had just been handed. What they saw instead was an old bolt-action rifle, its finish worn down to bare metal at the edges, its stock scarred and darkened by years of hard use, a weapon that looked less like a museum piece and more like an old friend who had been to 100 terrible places and come home from everyone. Mercer looked at that battered old rifle, and one last flicker of contempt crossed his face, one last desperate grab at the world, as he had always believed it to be. "That," he said, "you're going to make an impossible shot with that." Olivia Carter lifted the rifle from the case, and as she rose to her feet, the whole range seemed to rise with her 40 men holding a single breath, the general standing silent, Daniel Brooks watching with his heart hammering against his ribs. She looked out across the canyon. She looked at the shimmer rising off the floor, at the flags by the line, at the hidden currents she alone could see, at the target waiting 2,000 meters away in the moving ocean of air that had humbled every man who came before her. "It was never impossible," she said so quietly that only the men closest to her heard it. It was just waiting for someone willing to see it. And then Captain Olivia Carter stepped onto the firing line. She lowered herself behind the rifle, and 40 men leaned in as one. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. The colonel stood a few feet behind her with his arms crossed and his jaw set, waiting, some ugly part of him still hoping she would fail so that the world would go back to making sense. Daniel Brooks stood off to the side with his fists clenched at his sides, and he found that he was praying. Actually praying that this woman would do the thing he had watched her prepare for all morning without ever lifting a finger. Olivia Carter settled her cheek against the worn stock of that old rifle, and the entire range disappeared for her. The colonel disappeared. The 40 operators disappeared. The general disappeared. There was only the wind, the three winds moving across 2,000 meters of empty air, and the small steel target waiting in the middle of it all. Her spotter, a young operator named Cole, whom the general had motioned forward, dropped into position beside her and put his eye to the scope. His hands were not quite steady. He had never spotted for a legend before, and he was terrified of saying the wrong number. "Ma'am," Cole said quietly. "You want my read? Give it to me," Olivia said. Cole read off his solution. It was the same solution that had failed 9 men. Surface wind 5 miles an hour left to right. Standard drop for the distance. A good, honest textbook read. "Thank you," Olivia said. And then, without any heat, without any correction that would have shamed the boy, she said, "Now forget it." Cole blinked. "Ma'am, your read is right for the range you can see," she said. "But there's a range you can't see down in that canyon. Watch." She did not lift her eye from the scope. The surface winds 5 left to right, like you said, but 200 meters out the ground drops away, and the round drops with it right down into a crosswind, running the other direction, right to left, faster, maybe 9-10. Then it climbs out the far side. In the last 300 meters, it's fighting a thermal coming straight up and off that hot rock. That thermal's flattening the drop. So if I hold for your read, I miss right, and I miss high, exactly like every man out here did all day. Cole stared at her. "How do you even hold for all that?" "You don't hold for the wind you feel," Olivia said. "You hold for the wind that's actually out there. Watch the flags." And here is the thing that would stay with Cole for the rest of his career, the thing he would tell young shooters about for the next 20 years. She did not touch a computer. She did not run a single number through a machine. She read the whole thing with her eyes, the way the colonel had spent all day insisting was a lost art, except she was not lecturing about it. She was doing it, and she was about to prove it was not lost at all. It had simply been standing in the shade all morning, waiting to be asked. She adjusted her hold. Not her dope, her hold, walking the crosshair off the target and out into empty air, far to the left of where any man on that range would have aimed, into a patch of nothing that made Cole's stomach drop because it looked so wrong. "Ma'am, that's way off the steel," Cole whispered. "I know," Olivia said. "That's where the wind's going to take it back." Mercer, watching from behind, saw where she was aiming and let out a short, disbelieving breath. "She's aiming at open desert," he muttered, half to himself, half to the men. She's not even pointed at the target. Nobody answered him. Daniel Brooks did not take his eyes off her. Olivia Carter breathed. In slow, out slower. And on the pause at the bottom of that breath, in the stillness between one heartbeat and the next, she fired. The crack of the rifle rolled out across the range and echoed off the canyon walls. For a full 2 seconds, nothing. 2 seconds is a long time when a bullet is traveling 2,000 meters through 3 different winds. 2 seconds is long enough for a proud man to start to hope, and long enough for a young sergeant to stop breathing entirely. Then Cole, his eye jammed against the scope, saw the target rock backward on its mount, and he heard a half-second later the faint, unmistakable clang of steel come rolling back across the desert. Impact, Cole said. His voice cracked on the word. He cleared his throat and said it again louder so the whole range could hear him. Impact. Center mass. That's a hit. The silence broke into a low murmur that ran through the 40 men like a current. Heads turned. Someone said a word under his breath that would not have passed inspection. Whitaker, the old operator, who had said it wasn't the fish, it was, the water, let out a slow breath and shook his head with something close to reverence. Mercer's arms were still crossed, but his jaw had come loose. He stared out at that distant target, the one none of his men could touch, the one he had told them they were too soft to hit. And he watched it swing slowly back into place, and a small, mean voice inside him grabbed for the only thing it had left. Lucky, he said. He said it too loud. One shot. Anybody can get lucky at distance once. The wind cooperates for half a second, and even a blind man puts one on steel. Let's see her do it again. And here is where you see the difference between a legend and everyone else. Olivia Carter did not react to him. She did not turn around. She did not defend the shot. She simply worked the bolt, the old action, cycling smooth as water, chambered a second round, and settled back down behind the rifle as if the colonel had not said a word, because she had already heard the wind change. Cole heard it too. A half second later, felt the flags by the line shift as a new gust came up. Ma'am, wind's picking up. It just shifted. Hang on. It's coming more from behind now. I don't have a number for you. It's changing too fast. I have it, Olivia said. Ma'am, it's moving. You should wait for it to settle. It's not going to settle, she said. It never settles out here. That's the whole test. You don't wait for the wind to be right. You shoot in the wind that's there. Her cheek was already back against the stock. The surface just went tailwind, which means the crosswind in the canyon just got stronger because now there's nothing holding it back. So I hold more, not less. Everybody's instinct when the wind grows is to fight it. You don't fight it. You give it what it's asking for. She walked her aim even farther off the steel, farther into the emptiness. And Cole had to physically stop himself from telling her she was aiming at a spot of desert that had nothing in it at all. Mercer saw it too. Now she's aiming at Tucson, he said, and a couple of the men actually laughed nervous laughs, the laughter of people who no longer knew what they believed. Olivia breathed, fired. The crack, the long, aching wait. And then the target rocked back a second time and the clang came rolling home, and Cole was already turning to the range with his fist half raised. Impact, Cole called out. Second hit, same target, center mass again. He turned to look at Olivia, and his face was the face of a young man who had just watched the impossible happen twice in a row. Ma'am, I've never seen that's two. The murmur among the men rose into something louder, now no longer able to be contained. Someone said, 2,000 meters twice in shifting wind, and let the sentence hang there because there was nothing to add to it. Daniel Brooks felt a grin break across his face that he could not have stopped if he tried to, and he looked over at Whitaker, and Whitaker looked back at him, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say. And Colonel Jonathan Mercer felt the last of his certainty draining out of him like water through his fingers, and he grabbed at it one final time because that is what men like him do. They cannot help it. The pride is louder than the truth right up until the moment it isn't. Two, he said, and his voice had lost most of its strength now, but he pushed it out anyway. 2 shots, fine. Good shooting, I'll give you that. But you and I both know the third one is where it falls apart. Anybody can settle into a rhythm, get comfortable, string 2 together when the conditions hold. He gestured out at the canyon and his hand was not quite steady. But the wind's changing again. Look at those flags, it's swinging back around. And no reed survives 3 shots when the range keeps moving under you. 2 is skill, 3 is where the desert humbles you, so go on. Take your third. Let's all watch what happens. For the first time, Olivia Carter turned her head and looked at him. It was not a long look, but it was a look that 40 men would remember for the rest of their lives because there was no anger in it and there was no triumph in it, and somehow that made it land harder than either would have. It was the look of a teacher who has been patient a very long time with a student who refuses to learn and who has decided finally that the kindest thing she can do is simply let the lesson speak for itself. "Colonel," she said quietly, "you keep telling me what's impossible. You've been telling these men what's impossible all day." She turned back to the rifle. "The wind is changing again. You're right about that. It's swinging back to a headwind, which is going to steepen the drop and pull the round left, and it's doing it right now faster than your eye can follow." She settled her cheek down against the worn stock one last time. "The difference between you and me isn't that I can make this shot and you can't. The difference is that you see the wind changing and you call it impossible. I see the wind changing and I already know where it's going." And then before Mercer could find a single word to answer her, she added the line that Daniel Brooks would repeat to himself on hard days for the rest of his career. "The wind's not your enemy, Colonel. Your certainty is." She did not wait for a reply. She was already gone inside that stillness, where the range did not exist, where there was only the moving air and the small steel truth 2,000 meters away. Cole pressed his eye to the scope and did not dare to breathe. Daniel Brooks realized his hands were shaking. Even the general, a man who had seen everything, leaned forward half an inch. The wind swung. Olivia felt it come around, felt the headwind build against her face, and this time she did not walk. Her aim left. She walked it right back toward the target and then past it, holding into the new wind that was trying to pull the round the other way. And the correction was so different from the 2 shots before it that Cole nearly said something, nearly told her she was aiming at the wrong side entirely, and then he stopped himself, because who was he to tell Ghost 7 where the bullet was going to go? Mercer watched her aim swing to the opposite side of the target from where it had been a moment ago, and he opened his mouth and no sound came out, because even he could feel, now that he did not understand what he was looking at, and that the not understanding was the whole point, and that it had been the whole point since the moment he laughed at her from the firing line that morning. Olivia Carter breathed in. She let it half out, and in the still silent gap at the bottom of that breath, with the wind moving 3 different ways across 2,000 meters of desert, she fired the 3rd shot. The crack rolled out, and then came the wait, the terrible endless wait, 2 seconds that stretched out like 2 hours. The round was out there now, dropping into the canyon, being shoved by the hidden crosswind, lifted by the dying thermal, pushed by the new headwind, threading through a maze of moving air that no man on that range could see, carrying with it everything the whole day, every insult, every failure, every certainty the colonel had ever held. Cole stared through the scope. His lips moved, but no sound came. The target rocked back. The clang came rolling home across the desert, clear and clean and final. And Cole came up off that scope and turned to the entire range with tears standing in his eyes that he was not ashamed of, and he shouted it. He did not call it. He shouted it, so the canyon walls threw it back. "Impact 3 for 3, 3. Impossible shots, center mass, all 3. She did it. She actually did it." The range erupted. 40 of the most disciplined operators in the country, men trained to hold their composure through hell, broke into a roar that rolled across the desert. They were shouting, some of them, and a few of them were pounding each other on the back, and Whitaker had his hat off and was slapping it against his leg, and Daniel Brooks was laughing and shaking his head and blinking hard, and even the general, that silent granite man, allowed himself a slow, deep nod, the nod of someone watching a thing he already knew to be true, be proven in front of people who needed to see it. The same target that had defeated the 40 finest shooters in America had just been struck 3 times in a row in shifting wind at 2,000 meters by a woman with an old scarred rifle, a woman the colonel had ordered to wait in the car. And Colonel Jonathan Mercer stood in the middle of all that noise, and he did not hear a single sound of it. He was staring at this distant target, at the small steel shape still swinging on its mount, and inside him something was coming apart that had held together for 42 years. Because it was not just that he had been wrong about her. A man can be wrong about a person. That happens. That heals. It was that he had been wrong in front of everyone, wrong at the top of his voice, wrong with all the weight of 4 decades behind him, And he had been wrong in the exact way he had spent his whole career warning young men not to be. He had blamed good men rather than question himself. He had protected his assumptions and called it protecting standards. He had looked at a person and decided he knew everything he needed to know, and everything he had decided had been exactly precisely humiliatingly false. The noise went on around him, and Mercer stood inside a silence of his own making, and for the first time in a very long time, that hard old man did not know who he was. Olivia Carter rose from behind the rifle. She did not celebrate. She did not look at the colonel with any hint of, "I told you so." She simply worked the bolt one last time, caught the empty brass in her palm and slid it into her pocket, the way she had done 10,000 times, because that was a habit older than any of these men. And then she stood there quietly and let the men have their moment, because she understood something about them that Mercer had never understood, which was that they had earned this feeling, all of them, even in their failure, and it was not her place to take it from them. The general stepped forward and the noise settled, and he looked at the 40 men, and then he looked at the target still swinging in the distance, and then he looked at Olivia. "For those of you keeping score," the general said, and there was the faintest dry humor in his voice, "that's 3 impact at 2,000 meters in a 3-way wind with iron discipline and no computer on a course that put 40 of you in the dirt all morning. I trust the demonstration is over." A ripple of low laughter moved through the men, but it was Daniel Brooks who spoke first, stepping forward out of the group, and every head turned to him because he was young and he was breaking ranks, and there was something burning in his face that made men listen. "Ma'am," Daniel said, "how do I learn to see at the wind? All 3 of them. How do I learn to see what you see?" Olivia Carter looked at him, and there it was again, that flicker of recognition, the same one from the shade that morning. Because of all the questions the men could have asked, of all the ways they could have reacted to what they had just witnessed, this young sergeant had asked the only one that mattered. Not, "How did you do that?" Not, "Are you really Go 7? Not, "Can you teach me to shoot like a legend?" He had asked, "How do I learn to see?" And he had asked it standing in front of 40 men who had just been humbled without a flicker of shame, because he was more hungry to understand than he was afraid to look foolish. And that Olivia knew was the whole game. That was everything. That was the difference between the men who would go home and the men who would go forward. "You already started," she told him. "This morning, you were the only one who walked over and asked. Everybody else stood on that line all day and looked at the target." She nodded toward the canyon. "You looked at me, and then you looked where I was looking. That's the first thing. Most people can't do the first thing. Their pride won't let them admit there's something out there they can't see." Daniel swallowed. "You put a round near the steel for me, on my turn. That hold you gave me, that was you, wasn't it? You told me where to aim without telling me." "I gave you a nudge," Olivia said. "You made the shot. Don't hand me your work, Sergeant. Own it." A pause. "You held into a wind you couldn't feel because you trusted that it was there. Most men can't do that either. They have to feel a thing to believe it. You believed it before you felt it. That's rarer than good aim. Good aim I can teach anybody. That I can't." Daniel Brooks stood a little taller, and something settled into him in that moment, some understanding of himself that he had not had 5 minutes before, and he would carry it for the rest of his life. But not everyone was ready to bend. There is always one. There was a shooter near the back, a big operator named Kessler, all shoulders and reputation, one of the men who had missed 3 times and blamed his gear and his solution and everything except the possibility that there was a wind he had not accounted for. And Kessler, who had spent all day taking Mercer's side because Mercer's side was the side where none of this was his own fault, folded his arms and said loud enough to carry, "Anybody can make a shot on a known range they've had all morning to study. Put her down range and the real thing, no time to read the wind for an hour, see how that old rifle does then." The range went quiet again, a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when someone says the thing everyone else was too impressed to say. Olivia Carter turned to look at Kessler, and she did not seem offended. If anything, she seemed almost pleased the way a teacher is quietly pleased when the difficult student finally reveals exactly what is wrong with his thinking, because now at last it can be fixed. "You think I studied this range for an hour," she said. "You were staring into that canyon all morning," Kessler said. "We all saw it." "I was staring at the wind for about 90 seconds, Olivia said. "The rest of the morning I was watching all of you. Watching who got frustrated and who got curious, watching who blamed the range and who started asking why, watching which of you looked at the target and which of you, just one of you, looked at what the target was doing. Her eyes flicked to Daniel and back. The wind I could have read in a minute and a half. That's not the hard part. The hard part is the part you just showed me, Kessler. The part where a man would rather believe the whole world is rigged against him than believe there's something standing right in front of him that he refused to see. Kessler's jaw worked. He had no answer for that, because it was true, and everyone standing there knew it was true, and the truth of it was written all over his own morning 3 misses and a mouthful of excuses. And it was in that moment, with the men gathered close and Kessler silenced, and Daniel Brooks lit up like a man who had found his purpose, that Colonel Jonathan Mercer finally spoke. He had been silent so long that when his voice came, it startled them. It was quieter than they had ever heard it. The bark was gone. The 40 years of certainty were gone. What was left was just a man. "Captain Carter," Mercer said. Everyone turned. Olivia looked at him and waited. Mercer opened his mouth, and for a moment nothing came, and the men watched their commander stand there and struggle with something that was clearly harder for him than any range he had ever built. He was a proud man. Pride like his does not dissolve in an afternoon. But something in him had cracked wide enough that a little truth had gotten in, and now he had to decide what to do with it in front of everyone with nowhere to hide. "This morning," Mercer said slowly, "I looked at you and I decided I knew exactly who you were. I decided it in about 2 seconds. I've been deciding who people are in 2 seconds for 42 years, and I have always told myself that was wisdom." He stopped. His throat moved. "I told these men all day that they were soft, that they'd forgotten what skill looks like, that they were blaming the range because they couldn't face the mirror." He looked out at the target, then back at her, and his voice dropped even lower. "And the whole time the one blaming the range so he wouldn't have to look in the mirror was me." The men did not make a sound. "I built a test I didn't understand," Mercer went on, and it was clearly costing him everything to say it, each word dragged up from someplace deep and long buried. "You told me that an hour ago. I didn't want to hear it. I sent you to the car because it was easier than admitting a woman I'd never heard of might see something I couldn't. And these men, these good men, took my abuse all day for failing a test their commander was too proud to admit was broken." He turned then, and he faced his own operators, 40 of them, and Colonel Jonathan Mercer. 4 decades of service did a thing that none of them had ever seen him do, and none of them ever expected to. "I owe every one of you an apology," he said. "You didn't fail out there today. I failed you. I gave you a battlefield and told you it was a range, and when you couldn't solve it, I called you weak instead of asking what I'd gotten wrong." He drew a breath that shook a little. "That's not command. That's cowardice wearing command's uniform, and I'm sorry. You could have heard the wind. You could have heard a man breathe." Whitaker T., the old operator, the one who had said hours ago that it wasn't the fish, it was the water, was the first to move. He gave a single slow nod, and he said quietly, "Takes a bigger man to say that than to make the shot, Colonel." And he meant it. And Mercer knew he meant it, and something in the old colonel's shoulders eased by half an inch, the first easing of the whole long day. Olivia Carter watched all of this without a word, and when Mercer finally turned back to her, braced for whatever she might say, ready to be humiliated. The way he had humiliated her, she gave him nothing of the kind. "You want to know the thing you got wrong, Colonel," she said. "It wasn't sending me to the car. That's just pride, and every one of us has too much of it. The thing you got wrong is older than this morning." She nodded toward the men. "You spent 40 years believing that ability announces itself, that the best man walks in looking like the best man, that strength has a certain face and a certain voice and a certain uniform. And so every time it walked in looking like something else, you missed it. How many good operators do you figure you sent to the car over 40 years, Colonel, because they didn't look the way you decided the answer was supposed to look?" Mercer flinched, because he did not know the number, and the not knowing was worse than any number could have been. "A person's worth isn't in their appearance," Olivia said, and she was not just speaking to Mercer. Now she was speaking to all of them, and her voice carried across that silent range with the weight of someone who had paid full price for every word. Not their size, not their reputation, not whether they came in on a helicopter or drove up in a dusty SUV nobody bothered to look at twice. It's in preparation. It's in discipline. It's in whether they're willing to keep learning when everybody else has decided they already know. She let it settle. That's the whole lesson. That's worth more than 3 shots on steel. And it only cost you your certainty to learn it, which from where I stand is the cheapest price anybody's ever paid for it. And Colonel Jonathan Mercer, for the first time in longer than he could remember, had absolutely nothing to say. He simply stood there and took it, and taking it was its own kind of strength, a kind he had never valued and was only now too late, and yet not too late, beginning to understand. The men had begun quietly to gather closer around her. Not around him, around her, the instructor, the one they wanted to learn from. And Mercer watched them go, watched the center of gravity on his own range shift away from him and toward the woman he had mocked. And the strange thing, the thing that surprised him most, was that it did not fill him with resentment. It filled him with something closer to relief, as if a weight he had been carrying so long, he had forgotten it was a weight, had finally mercifully been set down. Daniel Brooks was closest of all, and he asked her low, "Ma'am, that demonstration, 3 shots, that wasn't really about proving anything to the colonel, was it? You didn't need to prove anything to him." Olivia Carter looked at him, and now at last the corner of her mouth moved into something that was almost not quite a smile. "No, Sergeant," she said, "it wasn't." "Then what was it about?" And she looked around at the 40 men gathered close at their faces, at the ones still burning with the thing they had just seen, and she did not answer him right away. Because the truth was that the 3 shots had never been the reason she came to that desert at all. The shooting was the smallest part of what today had been about. There was a reason a 2-star general had flown in personally. There was a reason the one name on the list had been hers. There was something coming, something that had nothing to do with proving a point to a proud old colonel, and everything to do with a handful of men on that range who had passed a test they did not even know they were taking. She held Daniel's gaze a moment longer. It was about finding out who was watching the wind, she said, and who was only watching the target. And she turned and looked out across the canyon one more time at the small steel shape still catching the late light 2,000 meters away, and the men fell quiet behind her, and every one of them understood without being told that the real reason she had come had not yet even begun. The general let the moment breathe, and then he stepped into the center of the gathered men and said the words that changed the entire day. "All right," he said, "gather in. Captain Carter's going to tell you why you're really here. And I promise you, gentlemen, it isn't to shoot at steel." The men shifted. The last of the celebration drained out of the air and was replaced by something sharper. More alert, the instinct of professionals who have just realized the ground under them was never what they thought it was. Daniel Brooks felt his pulse quicken. Whitaker's easy grin faded. Even Kessler, still stinging from being called out, straightened up and paid attention, because a 2-star general does not fly into the desert to watch a shooting demonstration, and every man there had known it in the back of his mind all afternoon without wanting to say it out loud. Olivia Carter set her old rifle down across the top of its case gently, the way you set down something that has carried you through worse days than this one, and she turned to face them. And when she spoke, the whole tone of her had changed. The patience was still there, but the softness was gone. This was not the woman who had waited in the shade. This was Ghost 7. 6 days ago, she said, we lost contact with an operative deep inside hostile territory. His name doesn't matter to you. His call sign doesn't matter to you. What matters is that he's one of ours. He's still alive as of 40 hours ago, and right now he's being held in a compound that sits in the worst piece of ground I've seen in 11 years of doing this. The silence was absolute. Nobody moved. There's a reason Command didn't just send in a team to go get him, Olivia went on. The compound sits at the bottom of a valley. One road and one road out, both watched. The only approach that isn't a suicide run is from a ridgeline 1,100 meters out on one side and a second position higher and farther, almost 2,000 on the other. She let that number land, and every man there felt it land because they had all just spent a day proving what 2,000 meters could do to them. When the team goes in to pull them out, they're going to be exposed for 90 seconds crossing open ground. 90 seconds. And in those 90 seconds, the only thing standing between that team and the guns in those towers is going to be 2 shooters on 2 ridgelines, making shots exactly like the ones you all missed today. Nobody said a word, but the understanding moved through them like cold water. That was why the range had been built the way it was. That was why the target, set 2,000 meters out across a canyon, that lied to you with 3 different wins. It had never been a range at all. It had been an audition for the worst 90 seconds of somebody's life. So now you understand, Olivia said. The course wasn't cruel to be cruel, it was cruel because the mission is cruel, and I needed to know which of you the mission wouldn't kill. She looked around at their faces slowly, one by one. And here's the part your colonel taught you the hard way this morning, so learn it fast because we don't have time to learn it slow. I am not looking for the men who shot the best today. Not one of you hit that target. If I wanted the best shooters, I'd be somewhere else. I'm looking for something the target can't measure. Mercer, standing at the edge of the group, now no longer in command of anything, listened to this with a strange feeling building in his chest, because he was beginning to understand that the woman he had dismissed had not come to embarrass him. She had come to do the most important thing a leader ever does, which is to look at a group of good men and correctly guess which of them will hold when everything is on fire. And she had done it all day silently from the shade, while he blustered and blamed and saw nothing at all. Sergeant Brooks, Olivia said. Daniel came to attention. Ma'am, you walked over to me this morning when nobody else would. You asked me what I saw. Then you held into a wind you couldn't feel because you trusted it was there, and you put a round on the edge of the steel when men with twice your experience were missing by yards. She held his eyes. On the extraction, I need a spotter and a second shooter on the near ridge who won't freeze when the reed stops making sense. That's you, if you want it. Daniel did not hesitate. I want it, ma'am. You don't get to want it that fast, Olivia said, and there was steel in it. I need you to understand what you're saying yes to, 1,100 meters. A man's life in the reticle, not a piece of steel. If you miss, he doesn't get to walk back and try again. There is no second target on this course, Brooks. The target is a person, and the person only dies once. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. I understand, ma'am, and I still want it. Olivia held his gaze one long moment, more testing it, and then she nodded once. Good, she said, and that single word meant more to Daniel Brooks than any medal he would ever be given. She turned to the group. I need 3 more, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I'm choosing, because I want the ones I don't pick to understand it, and I want the ones I do pick to never forget it. I am not choosing the loudest. I am not choosing the biggest reputations. I watched every one of you all day, and I saw exactly who you become the moment you fail. She let that hang. Because you will fail out there. Everybody does. And the only thing that matters, the only thing, is what you do in the 2 seconds after you fail. Some of you got angry and looked for something to blame. Some of you got quiet and looked for the answer. I'm taking the ones who looked for the answer. She named them. Whitaker, the old operator for the far ridge, the 2,000-meter position, because a man who could look at 40 failures and calmly say, it's the water, not the fish, was a man who would not lose his head when the wind turned in the worst moment. A shooter named Ellis, quiet all day, who had missed 3 times and then walked the range studying the flags instead of complaining, trying to teach himself the thing he could not yet name. And one more, a young operator named Park, who had failed as badly as anyone, but who had spent the afternoon asking questions of the men around him instead of making excuses. And then she stopped. 3 names. She needed 1 more, and she did not say it. Kessler at the back, the big one, the one who had challenged her, the one who had spent all day on Mercer's side because it was the side where nothing was his fault, felt the silence and felt himself being left out of it, and something in him could not stand it. You're not going to pick me, Kessler said. It was not quite a question. It was a man watching a door close. No, Olivia said, simply, no cruelty in it. I'm not. I've got more combat time than half these guys. I've made hard shots. Real ones, not on a range. His voice was climbing. Ellis missed the same as me. Park missed the same as me. Why them and not me? And here the whole range went still again because this was the real test. This was the thing the entire day had been building toward, and everyone could feel it. Because when you missed, Olivia said quietly, you told me your gear was wrong. You told me the solution was wrong. You told me the range was rigged and the wind cooperated for me and the whole thing was luck. She took a step toward him, not aggressive, just closing the distance so he could not hide from it. Ellis missed and went and studied the flags. Park missed and went and asked the man next to him what he was doing different. You missed Kessler and you looked for somebody to blame all day right up until 3 minutes ago. And out there on that ridge in those 90 seconds, when your rage stops making sense and the wind does something it's got no business doing, I need a man who's going to search for the answer, not a man who's going to search for someone to blame. Her voice dropped. Because the thing you blame doesn't save the operative. The answer does. And you're not wired to look for the answer yet. Maybe someday. Not today. Kessler stood there with his fists clenched, and the whole group waited to see what he would do. And this was the mini climax of the entire selection. Because a man's true character shows not in how he takes praise, but in how he takes a truth he does not want to hear. For a long moment, it could have gone either way. Kessler's face worked, his jaw flexed. And then slowly the fight went out of him, and something else came into his eyes, something that looked almost like the beginning of understanding. You're right, Kessler said. The words came out rough like they hurt on the way. I blamed the gear. I blamed you. He stopped, swallowed. I missed 3 times, and I never once asked myself what I got wrong. Not once, which He looked at her. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's what you were testing. That's what I was testing, Olivia said. And this surprised everyone, her voice softened. And the fact that you can say that right now in front of these men means you're closer than you think, Kessler. I'm not taking you on this one. But don't you dare go home and decide you're not good enough. You're plenty good enough. You just spent today protecting your pride instead of hunting for the truth, and that's a habit, and habits break. She held his eyes. Break it. And the next time I run one of these, walk over and ask me what I see. You'll be the first name I write down. And Kessler, the big loud operator who had fought her all day, nodded slowly, and something changed in him right there in front of everyone. And Daniel Brooks watched it happen and understood that he had just seen the second lesson of the day, quieter than the 3 shots, but somehow bigger. The first lesson had been that ability does not announce itself. The second was that a good teacher does not just choose the ready. She shows the unready the exact door they need to walk through and leaves it open. The 4th name went to a shooter named Torres who had said almost nothing all day, but who Olivia had watched miss, and never once curse, never once complain, just keep quietly trying to solve the thing in front of him with a patience that reminded her a little of herself at that age. 5 of them then. Olivia Brooks, Whitaker, Ellis Park, Torres. 6 shooters for a mission that would come down to 2 ridge lines in 90 seconds. The general stepped forward again. The team infiltrates in 72 hours, he said, which means you have exactly 2 days to learn to do on demand in unfamiliar terrain what none of you could do here on a range you had all morning to study. Captain Carter runs the training. Whatever she says goes. She has full authority. He looked at Mercer as he said it, not unkindly, but clearly, so there could be no confusion. Full authority. Are we clear? Clear, sir, the men said. And then something happened that nobody expected. Colonel Jonathan Mercer stepped forward. The men tensed. They had watched him get humbled all afternoon, and part of them braced for him to make one last grab at his lost authority to insert himself to remind everyone he was still a colonel. Daniel Brooks felt his stomach tighten. Even the general watched him carefully. But that was not what Mercer had come forward to do. Captain Carter, Mercer said, I want to ask you something, and I want the men to hear the answer, because I think they need to hear it more than I do. He drew a breath. This morning I told them that they'd forgotten what real skill looks like, that they relied too much on their gear, that in my day we read the wind with our own eyes. He paused. And then you walked out there and read the wind with your own eyes, no computer, no gear, and made 3 shots I'd have called impossible. So I have to ask you in front of them. Was I right about the gear, about the old way being the better way? And it was a real question. That was what stunned them. It was not a trap, and it was not pride. It was an old man who had watched his entire worldview get rearranged in an afternoon, honestly asking whether the one thing he had built his identity on was true or false, and being willing to hear either answer in front of the men he commanded. Olivia Carter considered him for a moment, and when she answered, she gave him something better than agreement and better than dismissal. She gave him the truth. You were half right, Colonel, she said. And the half you got wrong is the half that hurt these men all day. She stepped closer. You're right that a shooter who can't read the wind with his own eyes is a shooter who dies the first time his machine fails him. Gear breaks, batteries die, the screen fogs up at the worst possible second. So yes, the eye matters, the old skill matters, and I'd take a man who can read the flags over a man who can only read a screen every single time. She paused. But here's the half you got wrong. Reading the wind with your own eyes isn't about being old-fashioned. It isn't about being tougher or purer or better than the young men who use tools. It's about seeing what's actually there instead of what you expect to be there. And Colonel, she let it land gently. You spent all day looking at a range and seeing what you expected, not what was actually there. You didn't just fail to read the wind on the target. You failed to read the wind on your own men, on me. The skill you were preaching about all morning is the exact skill you weren't using. Mercer took that, full in the chest. And the remarkable thing, the thing that made a few of the men look at their commander was something new, was that he did not flinch from it. He nodded slowly and he said quietly, "Then I've got some reading to relearn." "We all do," Olivia said. "Every day we're out here. The day you think you've got the wind figured out is the day it kills you." And with that, the demonstration was over and the real work began. The next 48 hours moved fast. Olivia took the 5 men out into terrain that punished every weakness the range had exposed, and she trained them the way she had learned herself, hard and honest and without a shred of comfort. She did not lecture. She showed. She put Whitaker on a 2,000-meter problem in swirling wind and made him miss over and over and refused to tell him why until he stopped fighting the wind and started listening to it. She stood behind Daniel Brooks at 1,100 meters and taught him to feel the canyon crosswind. He could not see to hold into nothing and trust it. And the first time Daniel put 3 rounds into a fist-sized groupie at that distance, he came up off the rifle shaking, and Olivia just said, "Now do it tired, now do it scared, because that's the only version that counts," and made him do it again. She worked with Ellis on his breathing, with Park on his patience with Torres, on trusting the read even when it felt wrong. And through all of it, she watched them, still watched them the same way she had watched them on the range, because the training was never only about the shooting. It was about who they became at hour 20 of no sleep, who they became when the wind turned against them for the 10th time, who they became when they were cold and frustrated, and a man's life was starting to feel real in the reticle. And here's the thing that surprised everyone, including Olivia. Colonel Mercer stayed. He did not have to. The general had relieved him of authority for the mission, and he could have flown out with his dignity in tatters and licked his wounds somewhere far from the men who had watched him fall. But he stayed, and he did not stay to command. He stayed to carry water and haul gear and spot for the shooters when they needed a second set of eyes. And every so often, when one of the men made a mistake, Mercer would open his mouth to bark the old way, the blaming way, and then he would stop himself, and instead he would say, "What do you think you got wrong out there?" And the men noticed. They all noticed. And slowly over 2 days, the thing that had died on that range began quietly to be rebuilt into something better. On the evening of the second day with the mission, 12 hours out, Olivia found Mercer sitting alone away from the others, cleaning one of the spotting scopes, and she sat down near him without a word. They watched the last light go for a while in silence. "I keep doing the math," Mercer finally said. 42 years, how many I sent to the car." He shook his head. "I'll never know the number. That's the part that gets me. I'll never even know how many good ones I threw away because they didn't look the way I decided the answer was supposed to look." "No," Olivia said. "You won't. That's supposed to make me feel better." "No," she said. "It's supposed to make you feel it, because the day it stops bothering you is the day you go back to being the man who sent me to the car." She looked at him. "You want absolution, Chernell. I can't give it to you. Nobody can. But you're out here at 60-something years old hauling gear and asking men what they got wrong instead of telling them they're soft. That's not absolution. That's better than absolution. That's change." Mercer was quiet a long time. "Why'd you let me do it?" he asked finally. "This morning. You knew who you were. One word to that general on the phone, and I'd have been standing at attention. Why'd you just walk to the car?" And Olivia Carter looked out at the darkening desert, and something moved across her face that the men never got to see, some old private thing. "Because a long time ago," she said, Somebody looked at me the way you looked at me this morning, decided who I was in 2 seconds, sent me to the car. She paused. And the only thing that ever changed his mind wasn't me arguing. It wasn't me proving I belonged. It was me shutting up and doing the work and letting him watch it be true. She turned to him. Arguing and with a certain man just makes him dig in, Colonel. You know that better than anyone because you were that man this morning. So I didn't argue. I let the work argue. It's louder than I am and it never loses. Mercer absorbed that, and then he asked the question that had been sitting under everything for 2 days. This operative, he said, the one we're going in for. You said his name doesn't matter, but it matters to you. I've watched you for 2 days. It matters to you personally. Who is he? Olivia Carter did not answer right away. And in the silence, Daniel Brooks, who had come looking for her to report the gear was staged and had stopped just out of sight when he heard the colonel's question, found himself holding his breath. You want to know why the one name on that list was mine, Olivia said quietly. Why command flew a general into the desert to hand this to me specifically out of everyone they could have chosen? Yeah, Mercer said, I do. Olivia Carter looked down at the old scarred rifle resting across her lap, the one she had carried into that desert, the one that had made 3 impossible shots, the one that looked like it had been to 100 terrible places and come home from everyone. This rifle isn't mine, she said. Not originally. It belonged to the man who taught me everything I know about the wind. The man who first told me there's never just one wind, there's 3. The man who looked at a scared kid nobody believed in and decided to teach her anyway when everybody else had sent her to the car. Her hand rested on the worn stock. He gave me this rifle 11 years ago and told me to carry it until I found somebody worth passing it to. She looked up and her eyes were steady and her voice did not shake, but something underneath it did. The operative in that compound, Olivia said, the one we're going in to pull out in 12 hours, that's him. The words hung in the dark between them, and for a moment neither Mercer nor the hidden Daniel Brooks could find anything to say. The man who taught you, Mercer said slowly, the one who gave you that rifle, he's the operative. His name is Master Sergeant Monbo, Olivia said. Retired 8 years ago, or he was supposed to be retired. Turns out the kind of man Ray is doesn't retire. He went back in as a contractor, training local forces, the quiet kind of work nobody puts on a record. And 6 days ago, the compound he was working out of got overrun, and everybody got out except Ray, because Ray stayed at the wall long enough for the others to run, which is exactly the thing he would do, which is exactly the thing that makes him worth going in for. Her hand had not left the stock of the rifle. So when command looked at who to send, and they saw the shot it was going to take, and they saw whose life was on the other end of it, there was only one name that made sense. Because there's only one shooter alive who Ray Donnelly ever fully trusted with the wind. And he taught her himself. Mercer sat with that, and then he asked the question that Daniel Brooks, frozen in the dark just out of sight, was terrified to hear the answer to. Can you make the shot? Olivia Carter did not answer right away, and the honesty of her hesitation was worse than any confident yes would have been. The near shot, the 1100, that's Brooks, she said. I trained him for it. He can make it. I believe that, or I wouldn't have picked him. She paused. The far shot is mine. 2,000 meters across the valley in wind I've never read before because I've never stood on that ridge. And here's the part I haven't told anyone, Colonel, so you're going to be the first to hear it. She looked at him. Ray's going to be moving when I take the shot. The extraction plan has the team crossing open ground and Ray coming out with them, and there's a tower on the far corner with a heavy gun that ranges the whole crossing, and the only way that team lives is if that gun goes silent in the first 3 seconds. Which means my shot isn't on the tower. My shot is on the gunner in that tower. 2,000 meters. And if my red is off by even a little, if the wind does something I don't expect, I don't miss into empty desert like today. I miss into my own people. I miss into Ray. The weight of that settled over both men. Because this was the thing the range had never been able to test, the thing no course could ever fully prepare a person for. It was one thing to make an impossible shot at steel. It was another thing entirely to make it with the life of the man who raised you sitting 18 inches from where your round was going to land. That's why you needed to know who freezes, Mercer said quietly, understanding it now. All of it, the whole shape of the last 2 days. You weren't just picking shooters. You were picking men you could trust to hold the line while you spent everything you had on one shot you're not sure you can make. Now you're reading the wind, Colonel, Olivia said, and it was not mockery. It was the closest thing to a compliment she had given him. Daniel Brooks stepped out of the dark then because there was no honest way to keep standing there, and he did not pretend he had not heard. Ma'am, he said, I heard. I'm sorry I came to report the gears staged and I heard all of it. Olivia looked at him and she was not angry. Then you know what the 1100 is now, she said. You know it's not a range. I knew it wasn't a range the second you told me the target only dies once, Daniel said. But now I know something else, ma'am. Now I know that if I miss my shot, the tower opens up and you have to take yours faster in worse conditions with the whole crossing already going wrong. He swallowed. My miss doesn't just cost the team. It costs you your shot at saving him. It stacks the whole thing on top of you. Yes, Olivia said simply. It does. And here is where Daniel Brooks became the man he would be for the rest of his life, because a lesser man would have crumbled under that weight, and Daniel did the opposite. Something in him went very still and very clear the way it had gone on the range when he held into a wind he could not feel. Then I won't miss, Daniel said. Not a boast, a decision. I know I don't get to promise that, but I've been thinking about it wrong. I've been out here for 2 days scared of missing, and that's backwards. Scared of missing is how you miss. You taught me that with the wind, ma'am. You don't fight the thing you're scared of. You give it what it's asking for. He straightened. So I'm done being scared of it. I'm going to go do the thing you trained me to do, and I'm going to do it clean, and I'm going to keep that tower quiet long enough for you to bring him home. Olivia Carter looked at this young sergeant for a long moment, the one who had walked over to her in the shade when nobody else would, and something crossed her face that was almost pride and almost grief, because she was looking at a version of herself from 11 years ago, standing where she had once stood, being handed a weight that would either make him or break him. Ray would like you, she said quietly. That's the highest thing I know how to say about a person. They moved out 4 hours before dawn. The infiltration was long and cold and silent, the kind of movement that eats at a person hour after hour, and Olivia watched her shooters the whole way, watched who stayed loose and who tightened up, watched who ate when they were told to eat and slept, when they were told to sleep, even with their nerves screaming, because those small disciplines were the ones that would matter when the sun came up. Whitaker moved like a man half his age, or all economy, no wasted motion. Ellis and Park and Torres held their positions in the support element without a word of complaint, and Daniel Brooks climbed to the near ridge in the dark and settled into his position 1,100 meters from the compound, and Olivia climbed alone to the far ridge 2,000 meters out higher and colder with the old scarred rifle across her back. She reached her position as the first gray began to bleed into the eastern sky, and she settled in behind the rifle, and she began immediately to read the wind, and her stomach dropped. Because this ridge lied worse than the range ever had. There was a surface wind coming across her position, gentle, deceptive. But down in the valley between her and the compound, the air did something she had never seen before, funneling through a gap in the far hills and rolling across the crossing zone in a slow, heavy current that shifted every time the light changed. And the thermals had not even started yet because the sun was not up, which meant that in the 90 seconds that mattered, as the sun crested the hills and began to cook the valley floor, the wind was going to change underneath her in real time, exactly at the moment she could least afford it to. Go 7 in position, she said into the radio low. Be advised, far ridge conditions are worse than modeled. I've got a valley funnel wind that's going to build with sunrise. Everybody's red is going to go bad right when we cross. Adjust your holds as the light comes up. Trust the wind, not the numbers. Near ridge copies, came Daniel's voice steady, and Olivia felt a small flicker of relief because a scared man's voice shakes on the radio, and Daniel's did not. Holding for the valley funnel. I've got the tower and the 2 guards at the crossing. I'm ready, ma'am. The team moved into position at the edge of the open ground. The clock was running now. Somewhere down in that compound in a room, Olivia could not see a man who had taught her everything was about to be brought out into the worst 90 seconds of both their lives, and the only thing standing between him and the guns was 5 people on 2 ridgelines and a rifle that had once been his. Team is set, the ground commander's voice tight. We have eyes on the package. He's alive. He's on his feet. On your marks, Overwatch. We cross in 60 seconds. 60 seconds. Olivia settled her cheek against the stock, the same worn stock she had settled against 1,000 times, and she found the far tower in her scope, and she found the gunner a shape behind the heavy gun, and she began to build her hold. Surface wind light, valley funnel building, and there, just starting, the very first hint of thermal as the sun's edge touched the far ridge and the rock began to warm. 30 seconds. Ghost 7, the ground commander said, confirm you have the tower gunner. I have him, Olivia said. Her voice was perfectly calm. Inside, everything she had was pouring into the red, into the 3 winds, into the small shape behind the gun that she had to reach across 2,000 meters of shifting air. Hold your cross until my first round. The tower goes quiet, then you move. 15 seconds. And that was when it went wrong. Down at the crossing, one of the 2 guards Daniel had been watching turned for no reason. Just turned at exactly the wrong moment and looked directly at the shadowed edge where the team was staged. Olivia saw him stiffen. She saw his hand move toward his radio. Contact. Daniel's voice instantly. The near guard made the team. He's reaching for his radio. I have to take him now. It blows the timing, but I have to take him now. Do I take him? And this was it. This was the entire 2 days, the entire range, the entire test compressed into a single half second. Because if Daniel took that guard early, the tower would know something was happening, and the gunner would be alert, and Olivia's shot would go from hard to nearly impossible. But if Daniel did not take him, the guard called it in, and the whole compound came alive, and everyone died. Take him, Olivia said without a flicker of hesitation. Take him clean, then get on the second guard. I've got the tower. Go. Daniel Brooks did not hesitate either. He had held into a wind he could not feel 2 days ago on Faith, and now he held into the valley funnel the same way, and he pressed the trigger, and 1,100 meters away, the near guard dropped without a sound before his hand ever reached the radio. Guard down, Daniel said. Second guard's turning. He heard the round he's hold on, and there was a second crack, second guard down. Both crossing guards down. Ma'am, the tower is the only gun left, but he's alert. Now I heard him yell. He's on the gun. He's traversing. He's looking for us. I have him, Olivia said, and here is where the world narrowed down to nothing. The gunner in the far tower had heard the shots, and he was swinging the heavy gun toward the near ridge, toward Daniel, and in about 3 seconds he was going to find him, and when he found him, he was going to open up with a weapon that would tear that ridge apart. And Olivia Carter had to make a 2,000-meter shot on a moving alert target through a valley wind that was changing under her in real time as the sun climbed right now with no time left to perfect the red. She felt the wind shift as she began her breath. The thermal, the one that had not existed 60 seconds ago, was coming up now. Off the warming valley floor, and it was flattening her drop, and the funnel wind had built exactly as she'd feared. And if she held for the read she'd taken 30 seconds ago, she would miss high and right into the tower wall, and the gunner would live and Daniel would die. So she did the thing that Ray Donnelly had taught her 11 years ago on a different ridge in a different desert. She stopped trusting the numbers. She trusted the wind she could feel and see in this exact half second, the living wind, the one that was changing, and she walked her hold off the gunner, off him, entirely out into empty air. The way she had on the range into a patch of nothing that every instinct screamed was wrong, because she knew the way, she knew her own name, that the wind was going to carry the round back. He's got the near ridge, the ground commander's voice urgent. The tower's got Brooks Range Ghost 7, you have to take it now. Trust the wind, Olivia breathed half to herself, half to the man who had taught her the words, and she pressed the trigger. The round left the barrel and dropped into the valley, into the funnel wind, that shoved it up through the rising thermal that lifted it, and the 2 seconds it spent in flight were the longest 2 seconds of Olivia Carter's life. 2 seconds in which she could do nothing but wait and trust a reed she had built in a fraction of a heartbeat. And 2,000 meters away, the gunner in the tower, finger tightening on the trigger of the heavy gun with Daniel Brooks in his sights, went still and slumped, and the heavy gun fell silent before it fired a single round. Tower's down. Daniel's voice cracking with disbelief and relief. The tower gunner is down. The gun is silent. Ma'am, you got him. The crossing is clear. The crossing is clear. Go! Go! Tell them to cross. Team crossed now, the ground commander roared. Move, 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 Overwatch is holding. And they crossed. The team broke from cover and ran across the open ground, and in the middle of them on his feet, moving on his own, even after 6 days of captivity, because that was the kind of man he was Master Sergeant Ray Donnelly. And up on the far ridge, 2,000 meters away, Olivia Carter worked the bolt and stayed on the scope and covered every step of that crossing, ready for any threat. And the whole time, some part of her that she kept locked down tight was watching one shape in that running cluster of people, the one she had spent 11 years hoping she would never have to take a shot to save, and now had. Packages across, the commander's voice. Package is in the vehicle. We are moving. Overwatch, collapse your positions and exfil. Outstanding work, outstanding. And it was done. Olivia Carter lay behind the rifle for a moment longer than she needed to her cheek against the worn stock. Her eyes closed and she let herself feel just for one breath the thing she had not let herself feel for 6 days. And then she opened her eyes and she was Ghost 7 again, and she began the cold professional work of collapsing her position because the mission was not over until everyone was home. The exfil was long, the debrief was longer, and it was not until they were back across the line safe with the sun high now and the danger behind them that Olivia Carter finally stood in a dusty staging area and watched a battered, exhausted, grinning old man walk toward her, and Master Sergeant Ray Donnelly looked at the rifle slung across her back, his old rifle, the one he had given her 11 years ago, and his eyes filled up, and he said, "You still can't dial for a thermal to save your life. Had to eyeball the whole thing, didn't you?" And Olivia Carter Ghost 7, one of the finest shooters this country ever produced, laughed a real laugh, one almost nobody had ever heard, and she said, "You taught me to eyeball it, old man. Said the numbers will get you killed." "They will," Ray said. And then quieter, he pulled her into an embrace that 6 days of captivity had not been able to break out of him. "I knew it'd be you. Whole time they had me, I kept thinking they're going to send the kid. She's going to have to make an impossible shot with my own rifle to pull me out." He pulled back and looked at her. "And you did." 2,000, Olivia said, moving in a funnel wind that came up with the sun. Ray Donnelly whistled low. "Impossible shot," he said. "It's never impossible," Olivia said. "You taught me that too." And standing a little way off watching this was Daniel Brooks and Whitaker and the others, and none of them said a word because they understood they were watching something private, something 11 years in the making. And Daniel thought about the range and the woman in the shade nobody looked at twice, and the colonel who sent her to the car, and how the whole enormous weight of this day had rested in the end on the shoulders of a person almost everyone had underestimated. And he understood finally and completely why she had never once needed to prove anything to anyone, because she had known all along what the rest of them were only now learning, that the work argues and it never loses. But there was one more person watching from the edge of that staging area, one more man who had flown in on his own to see the team come home because he could not stay away. Colonel Jonathan Mercer stood apart from the others, and he watched Olivia Carter embrace the man she had crossed the world and threaded an impossible needle to save. And something worked in his weathered face, some final piece of the lesson settling into place. He had come to that range 3 days ago believing he knew what strength looked like, and he was leaving it having watched strength walk right past him in worn boots and plain clothes, carrying a scuffed black rifle case, and having very nearly sent it to wait in the car. Ray Donnelly noticed him standing there. "Who's the colonel giving us the 1,000-yard stare?" he asked. Olivia glanced over and a small, complicated expression crossed her face. "That's the man who ran the evaluation," she said. He and I got off on the wrong foot." "Wrong foot how?" "He took one look at me when I drove up," Olivia said, "and told me the range was no place for a civilian and ordered me to wait in the car." Ray Donnelly went very still, and then slowly he began to laugh, a deep, rasping, delighted laugh. The laugh of a man who has spent his whole life watching people make exactly that mistake about exactly this woman. "He did not," Ray said. "He did." "And what did you do?" Olivia Carter looked over at Colonel Jonathan Mercer, standing alone at the edge of it all, and for the first time, there was no edge in her at all, only something that looked almost like mercy. "I went and waited in the car," she said, "and then I let the work do the talking." Ray Donnelly wiped his eyes, still chuckling, and then he did something that surprised Olivia. He handed his weight off her shoulder, straightened himself up as best a man could after 6 days of captivity, and started walking toward Colonel Mercer. "Ray," Olivia said, "you don't need to." "I know I don't need to," Ray said over his shoulder, but a man who ordered Ghost 7 to wait in the car and then watched her make a 2,000-meter shot to save my sorry life, I want to shake his hand. Not to rub it in, to thank him for being the reason I'm breathing. He kept walking. "Besides, I've been that man. Every old soldier's been that man at least once. I just want to see his face." Mercer saw them coming and drew himself up, bracing for whatever was about to come, and what came was not what he expected. Ray Donnelly stopped in front of him, extended a hand that still had the marks of 6 days of rope on the wrist, and said, "Colonel, I'm the operative, the one your evaluation was built to pull out. I understand you had some words with the shooter who saved me." Mercer looked at that offered hand, at the rope marks, at the exhausted eyes of the man he had heard about, but never seen, the man whose life had been 18 inches from the round Olivia had sent across 2,000 meters, and something in the colonel's chest closed like a fist. "Master Sergeant," Mercer said, and his voice came out rough, "I don't deserve to shake that hand." "Probably not," Ray said cheerfully. "Shake it anyway." And Mercer did. He gripped the hand of the man his own blindness had nearly cost, and he held it a moment too long. And when he let go, his eyes were wet in a way that 42 years of hard soldiering had taught him to hide. And for once, he did not hide it. "I looked at her," Mercer said. "I looked at Captain Carter when she drove up, and I decided in 2 seconds she was a civilian who'd wandered onto my range. I told her the professional range was no place for her. I ordered her to wait in the car." He shook his head slowly. "And she is the only reason you're standing here. I have spent 3 days trying to understand how a man gets to be my age with my experience and makes a mistake that stupid, that fast, that completely—" Ray Donnelly looked at him for a long moment, and the good humor faded out of his face, replaced by something older and kinder and harder earned. "You want to know how," Ray said. "I'll tell you how, because I know exactly how, because I did it once too. 30 years ago, there was a skinny kid, no reputation, wrong background. Everybody said she'd never make it, and I damn near didn't take her because she didn't look like what I'd decided a shooter was supposed to look like." He glanced back at Olivia. "Almost sent her to the car too, Colonel. The difference between you and me is I got 1 second of doubt. 1 second where I thought, what if I'm wrong? And in that 1 second, I decided to let her shoot before I decided who she was. That's the whole difference, not wisdom, not experience. 1 second of being willing to be wrong." He looked back at Mercer. "You didn't get that second 3 days ago, but you got it eventually. Most men never do. So don't you spend the rest of your life beating yourself up over the 2 seconds you got wrong. Spend it grateful for the fact that you finally got the 1 second right." Mercer stood there and took them, and it went into him deeper than anything anyone had said to him in a very long time, because it came from the one man on earth with the standing to say it. "How many," Mercer said quietly. "That's the thing that won't let me sleep. How many did I send to the car over 42 years? Master Sergeant, how many good ones did I throw away because they didn't look right?" And Ray Donnelly gave him the only answer that was true, the same answer Olivia had given him 2 nights ago on the ridge. "You'll never know," Ray said, "and you shouldn't, because the day you make peace with that number is the day you go back to being the man who sent them. Carry it, not as punishment, as a reminder. Every time somebody walks up to you looking like the wrong answer, you let that number you'll never know remind you to give them the 1 second. That's what it's for now." He clapped the colonel on the shoulder. "That's how you turn the worst mistake of your career into the best thing you'll ever teach a young officer. You tell them about the day you sent Ghost 7 to the car, and you watch it change how they look at every kid who walks up not looking like much." Something shifted in Colonel Jonathan Mercer in that moment. Something that had been trying to shift for 3 days, finally coming all the way loose, and for the first time since a plain gray SUV had rolled onto his range, he did not feel like a man whose world had collapsed. He felt like a man who had been given something, a story to carry, a lesson too expensive to waste, and a strange, unfamiliar lightness, the lightness of a man who has finally set down a certainty he had been carrying so long he had mistaken it for his own spine. The days that followed were quieter, but they were not empty. The teams scattered back to their units, but something had happened out there on those 2 ridgelines that would not scatter with them. Daniel Brooks went home changed. He had walked onto that range 3 days ago as a young sniper with good hands and no idea what he was capable of, and he came off it having taken 2 shots that kept a heavy gun off his teammates and having held his nerve at the exact moment a lesser man would have broken. But that was not the thing that changed him. The thing that changed him was smaller and it lasted longer. It was that he had been the only one who walked over. He thought about that constantly in the weeks after. 40 operators had stood on that firing line and looked at the target. One of them had looked at the woman in the shade and walked over and asked her what she saw. And that one small choice, that willingness to admit there was something out there he could not see, and to go ask the person who could have been the difference between being sent home and being chosen for the hardest thing he would ever do. He understood now that the choice had not been about courage in the way he used to think about courage. It had been about humility, about being more hungry to understand than afraid to look foolish. And he made himself a promise quietly that he would be that man for the rest of his career. The one who walks over, the one who asks, the one who looks at what everyone else is walking past. Whitaker put in his retirement papers a month later, and when the young officers at his send-off asked him for the one piece of wisdom he wanted to leave behind after all his years, the old operator did not talk about any of the medals or the deployments or the hard shots. He told them about a range in the Arizona desert where 40 of the best shooters in the country failed all day, and a colonel blamed them for it, and a woman nobody looked at twice stood in the shade reading a wind none of them could see. And then he told them the thing that had stuck with him hardest of all. It wasn't the fish, Whitaker told them. It was the water. Every time your whole team fails at the same thing, stop blaming the fish. Go look at the water. And if there's somebody standing off to the side who's been staring at the water the whole time you were staring at the fish, you walk your behind over there and you ask them what they see. Don't care if they outrank you or don't rank at all. Don't care what they look like. You ask. Because the day I stopped assuming I already knew who had the answer was the day I actually started learning again, and I was 51 years old, and I'd wasted about 30 of those years being too proud to ask. He looked around at the young faces. Don't waste your 30. Ask sooner than I did. Kessler was the surprise. Everyone had written Kessler off, including Kessler, the big loud operator who had blamed his gear and blamed the range and blamed the woman all day and gotten left off the mission for it. But Olivia had said something to him that stuck, that door she left open when she told him he was closer than he thought. And Kessler, to his enormous credit, walked through it. He went home and he did the hardest thing a proud man can do, which is to sit with the truth about himself instead of running from it. And the next time an evaluation came around, a different instructor, Kessler was the first man to walk over and ask, "What am I missing?" He was not chosen that time either, but he was closer. And the time after that, he was chosen. And years later, when Kessler himself became an instructor, the very first thing he did with every new class was tell them about the day he missed 3 times and blamed everyone but himself. And how a woman named Ghost 7 had looked at him and said, "The thing you blame doesn't save anybody. The answer does." He built his whole teaching around it. He turned his worst day into the thing that made him worth learning from. And that, more than any shot on any range, was the proof that Olivia Carter had been right about him. She had seen in a man everybody else had written off the one thing that mattered. Not that he was ready, but that he could become ready if somebody left the door open. As for Ray Donnelly, he recovered slow, the way a man his age recovers from 6 days of captivity, which is to say incompletely and stubbornly and on his own terms. He refused most of the fuss. He refused the medical hold longer than he should have. And the one thing he asked for, the only thing, was to sit down with Olivia Carter one more time before she rotated back out to wherever the work took her next. They sat together on the evening before she left, 2 shooters, the old one who had taught and the younger one who had surpassed him, and for a while they did not talk about the mission at all. They talked about wind. They always talked about wind. It was the language they shared, the thing that had bound them together across 11 years, and a rifle that had passed from his hands to hers. And then Ray Donnelly said the thing he had been carrying since the moment he understood who had come to save him. "You know what I thought about," Ray said, "those 6 days, when they had me, when I didn't know if anybody was coming." He turned the words over slow. "I thought about the shot. I knew if anybody came, it'd be a shot like the one I always told you about, the impossible one. The one where the wind's doing 3 things and the target's moving, and you've got 1 round and no second chances. And I thought, God help whoever they send, because that shot has killed better shooters than me. He looked at her, and then I thought, no, they'll send the kid, and the kid can make that shot, because I taught her the only thing that matters, which is that the shot's never impossible. It's just waiting for somebody willing to see what everybody else missed. Olivia was quiet. You held on to that, she said, for 6 days. I held on to you, Ray said simply. The idea of you, out there somewhere carrying my rifle being the reason impossible, was a word that didn't apply to you. He reached over and put his weathered hand on the scarred stock of the rifle where it rested between them. I gave you this 11 years ago and told you to carry it till you found somebody worth passing it to. He paused. You find him yet? And Olivia Carter looked at the rifle, and then she looked out toward where a little distance off a young sergeant named Daniel Brooks was cleaning his own weapon in the last of the light, still turning over in his mind everything the last 3 days had taught him, still the man who walked over. I think I might have, she said quietly. Ray followed her gaze, and he saw the young man, and he saw the way the young man worked, careful and humble and hungry, and a slow smile spread across the old operator's face. The one who walked over, Ray said. It was not a question. Somehow he already knew. The one who walked over, Olivia confirmed. Everybody else looked at the target. He looked at me, and then he looked where I was looking. 11 years I've carried this thing, waiting for that, and I damn near missed him myself because he was standing in a crowd of louder men with bigger reputations. She shook her head. Turns out I almost made the same mistake the colonel made. Almost looked right past the answer because it wasn't the loudest thing in the room. But you didn't, Ray said. No, Olivia said. I didn't, because you taught me to watch the wind, not the target. And a man like Brooks, he's not the target. He's the wind, quiet, easy to miss, moves everything if you know how to see it. Ray Donnelly nodded, satisfied, the deep satisfaction of a man who has watched the thing he built get passed forward into hands worthy of it. Then you know what you have to do. And he said, I know, Olivia said. She did not do it right away. She waited the way she waited for everything until the moment was right. And the moment came on the last morning, just before she rotated out, when the team gathered one final time to say the things soldiers say to each other before they scatter back into the work. Olivia found Daniel Brooks, and she pulled him a little apart from the others, and she stood in front of him, holding the old scarred rifle in both hands. Sergeant, she said, 3 days ago you walked over to me when nobody else would. You asked me what I saw. You held into a wind you couldn't feel because you trusted it was there. And then you took 2 shots out there that kept a heavy gun off your team and gave me the room to bring Ray home. She held his eyes. You want to know the truth, Brooks? My shot doesn't happen without yours. If you'd frozen on that near guard, if you'd missed, the whole thing comes apart, and Ray doesn't come home, and I spend the rest of my life knowing it. You didn't just make your shots. You made mine possible. Daniel Brooks stood very straight. I was just doing what you trained me to do, ma'am. No, Olivia said. You were doing what you already were before I ever met you. I just gave it a place to point. And then she held the rifle out to him across both hands, offering it. This rifle isn't mine. It never was, not really. It belonged to Master Sergeant Ray Donnelly, the man who taught me everything I know about the wind. He gave it to me 11 years ago and told me to carry it until I found somebody worth passing it to. Her voice was steady, but underneath it was the weight of 11 years. I found him. It's you, Brooks. Take it. Daniel Brooks stared at the rifle and then at her, and for a moment he could not speak at all. Ma'am, I can't, he managed. That's Master Sergeant Donnelly's rifle. That's the rifle that made 3 impossible shots. I can't take that. You're not taking it, Olivia said. You're carrying it. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference. You carry it until you find somebody worth passing it to. Somebody quiet in a crowd of louder men who walks over and asks you what you see when everybody else is staring at the target. And when you find them, you hand it to them, and you tell them the same thing I'm telling you. She pressed it gently into his hands and closed his fingers around the worn stock. The shot's never impossible. It's just waiting for the right person to see what everybody else missed. And the whole job, Brooks, the whole entire job is learning to see it, and then teaching one more person to see it after you. That's how it goes on. That's the only way any of this goes on. And Daniel Brooks took the rifle. He took it in both hands, the way you take something sacred, and he understood in that moment that he had been handed something far larger than a weapon. He had been handed a line that ran from an old man who almost sent a skinny kid to the car to that kid who became Ghost 7, to a young sergeant who was the only one who walked over. A line made entirely of people who had learned to look at what everyone else was walking past. And now it ran through him. And it was his to carry, and his to pass on, and his to make sure never broke. "I'll find them, ma'am," Daniel said, and his voice was thick. "I promise you, whoever they are, however they walk up looking, I'll be the one who gives them the second. I'll be the one who walks over." "I know you will," Olivia said. "That's why it's you." She left that afternoon, no ceremony, no speech. She shouldered her gear and got into a plain vehicle the same way she had arrived in a plain SUV 3 days in a lifetime ago, and she drove out of their lives the same quiet way she had driven into them. And the men who watched her go understood, every one of them, that they had been in the presence of something rare, and that they would spend the rest of their careers trying to be a little more like the woman almost nobody had bothered to look at twice. Colonel Jonathan Mercer watched her vehicle disappear down the long desert road, and he stood there long after the dust had settled, and he made himself a promise that he kept for the rest of his years in uniform. He never again decided who a person was in 2 seconds. He gave every one of them the 1 second. The soldier who walked up looking too young, too small, too quiet, too wrong. The one who did not fit the picture he had carried in his head for 42 years of what the answer was supposed to look like. Every single one of them got the second now, because he had learned at the highest price a proud man can pay that the cost of that second is nothing, and the cost of skipping it is a woman waiting in a car who turns out to be the only person alive who can bring your friend home. He told the story for the rest of his career. He told it to every class of young officers who came through, and he did not soften it, and he did not leave out the part where he was the fool. He told them exactly how he had laughed at her in front of 40 men, exactly how he had ordered her to wait in the car, exactly how the general had walked past him to salute the woman he had mocked, and exactly how she had then made 3 shots that 4 decades of his experience had told him were impossible, and gone on to save a man's life across 2,000 meters of shifting wind with a rifle the colonel had sneered at. And then he would look at those young officers, at their smooth, confident faces, and he would tell them the only thing he had learned that was worth passing on. "Somewhere out there," Mercer would say, "is the person you're about to underestimate. They're not going to look like much. They're going to walk up quiet in the wrong clothes with no reputation you recognize, and every instinct you've got is going to tell you they don't belong. And in that moment, you are going to get exactly 1 second. 1 second to decide whether you already know who they are or whether you're willing to be wrong." I've been on both sides of that second. I've been the kid who got sent to the car early in my career before I forgot what it felt like. And I've been the old fool who did the sending. And I am telling you from the far end of a long life that everything comes down to what you do with that 1 second. Give it every time to everyone. Because the person you're about to wave off might just be the only one in the world who can see the wind. And the story spread the way the best stories do, from officer to officer, from unit to unit, until it stopped being about any one range or any one mission and became something closer to a lesson the whole community carried. The story of the colonel who mocked the quiet woman, and the 3 impossible shots that taught him what strength actually looked like. And every time it was told somewhere, some young soldier who did not look like much, who had been overlooked and waved off and told to wait in the car, heard it and sat up a little straighter and understood that the door was not closed, that the work argues, and that it never ever loses. Daniel Brooks made good on his promise. He carried Ray Donnelly's rifle for the rest of his career, and he became known in time as the instructor who watched the quiet ones, the one who noticed the soldier standing at the edge of the group, the one who could look at 40 shooters staring at a target and pick out the single one who was staring at the wind. And years later, on a range not unlike the one where it all began, a young recruit that everyone else had written off small and quiet and wrong-looking walked over to Daniel Brooks during a break and asked him hesitantly what he saw out there that nobody else could. And Daniel Brooks felt his whole chest go still, and he looked at that recruit and he saw 11 years and 2,000 meters, and a woman in the shade and an old man with rope marks on his wrist, and he saw the line, the unbroken line, arriving right on time in the hands of one more person worth passing it to. "There isn't one wind," Daniel Brooks said quietly and reached for the old scarred rifle. "There are 3. Because ability was never in the appearance. It was never in the C's or the reputation or the uniform or the way a person walked up looking like they did or did not belong. It was in the preparation, in the discipline, in the humility to keep learning, and the willingness to walk over and ask what everyone else was too proud to ask. Captain Olivia Carter had known that from the moment she stepped out of a dusty SUV into the laughter of a man who thought he already knew who she was. And by the time she drove away, she had taught it to every soul on that range and set it running down a line that would outlast all of them. The impossible was never impossible. It was only ever waiting for the right person to see what everyone else had missed. And she had made certain before she left that there would always be someone left who could see it.